Our next session will mainly be by Carlyn and Laurie. Please. These two ladies are from the Monash University Accident Research Centre. I think, Carlyn, your speciality is in the OH&S domain, emergency services, and Laurie is an expert in the statistics domain and the foibles of data sets and statistical elaborations and a whole lot of other interesting stuff. So they're going to talk to us about Monash University Accident Research Centre's activities in general, and also specifically the heavy vehicle space, their interest in their what they're working on, what they're not. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks for having us along today. I have some contact details up there, clearly not for me, but I'm actually presenting on behalf of Stuart today. Unfortunately, this is the largest road safety conference on this week as well, so Stuart's up there. But hopefully we can provide a bit of an overview today on MUARC and what we do. So while the focus of today's presentation is about data sets, and particularly safety data sets, because we're a safety research organisation, I'm just going to provide a really quick overview of the types of stuff we do, and also how we approach complex safety problems. And then I'm going to hand you over to Laurie, who's one of our statisticians, and Laurie's going to talk more specifically about the safety data sets that can be used in the heavy vehicle industry. So MUARC is a large multidisciplinary research centre based at Monash Uni. We work with a range of government agencies, industry bodies, and other stakeholders in safety, and we look at complex safety problems. And we work across three domains. So we work across transport, workplace, and home and community. And we undertake research. We have a range of disciplines that we use. We use statistics, we use behavioural safety scientists, we have human factors researchers, and we bring all of those things together to look at complex safety problems, particularly in transport. Transport is probably one of our strongest research areas. Now, Laurie's going to talk about these in a bit more detail, but the types of projects we do are enhanced crash investigations. So, for example, we've got two major enhanced crash investigation studies going on at the moment. One is with passenger vehicles, and the other one is with motorcycles. And we're trying to unravel crash causation, so we look at factors relating to leading up to the crash, and we do hospital interviews, we do crash inspections, we look at the vehicles, we look at the people. So those are some of the types of studies that we do. Similarly, we work with other agencies in the data space. So, for example, some of the research I do is with, for example, the Country Fire Authority, looking at their data sets and how you can link them, how you can merge them across their organisation, as well as linking with external data sets to better understand some of their safety issues. We've also worked in vehicle ergonomics, mining industry, ambulance, and Stuart does a fair bit of work with heavy vehicles as well. One of the big issues in the safety research is that, particularly around road safety, is there's a tendency to focus only on the individual driver. In general road safety, this is a bit of a problem because while individual drivers are, and driver behaviour is really important, that doesn't happen on its own. It happens within a much broader system, and you need to understand the whole system to understand why the person's behaving in the way they do. So when we think about road trauma, we tend to focus a lot on fatalities, which is really the tip of the iceberg, and we also tend to focus on what usually springs to mind is young people behaving badly, when we know that what that crashes are really multifactorial. They happen for a range of reasons, and often it's just because somebody made a mistake. It wasn't deliberate bad behaviour as such. Now, when you think about the heavy vehicle industry, there's lots of agents and there's lots of actors in that system. And understanding the way that the system interacts is actually really important, because if you want to understand what your safety problem is, you need to understand a lot more than just the crashes. You need to understand the factors around those crashes. For example, you've got lots of different levels right down to the individual driver themselves. Which takes me on to how we approach safety problems. So we use the public health approach, and this has really come out of the health space. So if you think about the way that we understand disease, we monitor disease over a long period of time, and not just that individual disease, but lots of factors around that disease. And what we try to do, we create these surveillance data sets, because when you've got an issue, it's too late to then start collecting the data. You need to have the data before you so that you can understand what's happening on the way to the problem. And it also gives you the opportunity to step in and when a problem is a small one before it gets to a really big one. So what we do is we do a lot of surveillance. So that's about bringing together big data sets and linking data sets so that you can identify risk and protective factors, so that you can then design solutions to try and intervene in that problem before it actually occurs, or occurs on a much bigger scale than you would want it to. So that's the general research approach that we take. So in terms of heavy vehicles, what's often focused on is A, the individual driver, and B, crashes. Now, crash data is really important and really useful, and Laurie will talk in detail about some of the crash data sets that we can use. But it's also really important to think about that system as well. And one of the things with a lot of organisations is stuff around near misses, because knowing what didn't happen can actually be as informative as knowing what did happen. And trying to somehow link those data sets into to your crash data sets can be really informative. You've got to understand exposure as well. So if you look at the, maybe from an organisational perspective, understanding things about, policies, procedures, the exposure of your individual drivers, your scheduling, all of those things are also really important when it comes to safety, because we know about the issues around OH&S and fatigue and how long you can drive for and all those types of things. Also, elements of vehicle purchasing are really important, and in the heavy vehicle industry, that's really tough. To give you an example, I do some work with the Country Fire Authority, and for us, we would say, all purchasing decisions should be based first and foremost on safety, whereas CFA, their first decision has to be, will the fire truck fit in the fire station? And right now, a lot of them wouldn't, because they're really small fire stations. So you've got to understand that those problems exist, and understand that all those modifications exist to those vehicles. But you also have to be able to measure that so that you can really understand the scope and the dynamics of your problem. Now, there are also some more intangible things that really play into this as well around organisational culture. And that's important in two ways. So we know that organisational culture actually has an influence on the way that people behave. And what we also know is that if you try and develop a solution or a technology and implement it in an organisation, if you don't have the right culture in place, then you get a lot of outrage about, Big Brother and all of those types of things. So it's important to understand the culture that you exist in. And there are actually ways of measuring those things now as well, so they're less intangible than they used to be, I guess. Similarly, leadership and all of those types of things also play into this, and there's a lot of research about individual relationships between supervisors and drivers in the work-related driving space that affect individual driver behaviour. And beyond that, there's also So in terms of quantitative data sets that can also be pulled in, a lot of the compensation data is quite useful, although again that focuses on when an injury has already occurred, and you do need to be collecting stats beforehand so that you understand your risk factors for injury. But compensation data is used quite frequently now to understand a lot of your safety problems. Now, so there are a wide range of administrative data sets we use as well, and Laurie's our statistician, and our team is going to talk more specifically about how those can be used and potentially linked to understand safety in the heavy vehicle industry. So I'll hand you over now, thank you.
Okay, I wanted to start first of all with police reported crash data. We collect data sets for New Zealand and all the jurisdictions, and for our crash worthiness ratings that we produce for used cars. We don't collect Northern Territory, ACT or Tasmanian data, and that's about 10% of the crashes in Australia. The problems with merging these into getting Australia-wide or Australasia-wide information is that each database has the data in a slightly different form, but generally we can get the same kind of information. We get time, date, weather, road surface information, the grade, the alignment, whether it's curved or straight, the configuration, that means like intersections or rail crossings or mid-block crash types, like whether they were adjacent or coming across on a lane or running off-road, that kind of thing. And the driver and passenger details like gender, sex, gender, age, position in the car for passengers, and the vehicle details, make and models, the manufacturer, and whether they were a pedestrian. The databases are generally person-based, although some of the states put, I think it's South Australia puts the things they crashed into as a case as well, like poles and barriers, and some of them also include trailers as cases in the data. Some of the data we need specific permission from providing agencies to access, and some you can access yourself, the same data that we get, like Vic Data has websites where you can download all of the crash data. Okay. Next one. Okay, some of the problems that we have with vehicle identification is what I'm trying to go through next. This gentleman over here spoke just before about how there's a problem with identifying light commercial vehicles. There is also that in the crash data. We have a method of VIN decoding which we use to identify all the passenger vehicles. So we can generally get out all of the data that is just passenger vehicles. So the utes and vans that are more of a passenger vehicle. But light commercial vehicles from 3.5 to 4.5 tonne are often difficult to extract from the data and identify. In Western Australia and Queensland, there are tear weights or GBMs that you can use to identify the weight. And in Victoria, from about 2000 onwards, the crash data has rigid trucks identified as less than 4.5 tonne, less than equal or greater than 4.5 tonne, so you can extract them there. With the light versus heavy rigid, in South Australia you can only know if the vehicles are greater than 3.5 tonnes, so you can't determine if it's between 3.5 and 4.5. And in New South Wales, you only have a over 4.5 tonne category. With the rigid versus articulated, generally all of the crash data covers that, but not for buses in those states listed there, and not for tankers. And I'll say on the next slide, tankers aren't identified at all in South Australian data. To identify the data, these types, you generally use a unit description, which is a general one, whether it's a car, a truck, an articulated truck, a utility van, those kind of things, and use the body type, which goes into more detail, where you get whether it was a fire truck or an ambulance or a tanker, those kind of things. Emergency vehicles often need to be extracted from the data that you're analysing because they have a totally different exposure and can skew your results. So depending on what you do, you may need to identify and extract the emergency vehicles, which has some problems. Generally, ambulances and tow trucks can be extracted, but you may not necessarily find fire trucks and police cars to be, or police motorcycles, whatever, to be identifiable. The tankers, I said, you can't identify them in the South Australian data. Also, to distinguish large and small buses in the crash data can be problematic also because some states define it by passenger seat number and others you can use the tail weights and some not at all. Okay. When we're talking about the things that you can get from, the information you can get from the crash data, I forgot to mention that you can also get spatial data, so you can do heat maps of where the crashes occur. I'm not quite sure which states don't provide the longitude and latitude for the crash, but I think Western Australia you can get it, and definitely Victoria. Back to vehicle identification. Now, in the articulated trucks, there is some definitions. You can identify whether a prime mover is carrying a trailer or not in all the crash data, but only road trains, V doubles and V triples can be identified in those states, and there's very poor data consistency with trailers on rigid trucks. Okay, beyond crash data, we also can get more details on the actual injuries. Within Victoria, we're lucky that we can link the TAC data, which will give us also the actual true cost of the injury for the person to the society. Also, we get some more information about where the injuries are in the body, which may be useful for deciding what sort of technologies are useful to help prevent those injuries. An example with passenger vehicles was done recently by linking the TAC data and looking at the airbags, the side control airbags, and seeing what kind of injuries they reduced. Okay, and in Western Australia we can also link it to data, but otherwise you can just look at the admissions data in general and get some information about where the parts of the body and sort of limited information there. And with coronial data, of course, you can get the circumstances of the death, the age of the person, and that kind of information. Carlyn mentioned the in-depth investigations. These are actually, this is the kind of information you can get off. You can get off that. You can get, we interview the people in the hospital. That's how we select the candidates, except for the motorcycle one, which was a case control one, so it was done by a bit more random allocation of the controls, the way they were selected. But we then also go out and look at the crash site, and we also look at the vehicle and determine more details of how that crash occurred, and that's very useful if you want to look at like whether it was fatigue related or speed related, or who was at fault. For example, you may want to use that information to look at whether a technology would prevent that crash. For example, if it's a lane departure type technology you're looking at, and the truck wasn't the one that departed the lane, and it was another vehicle, having the lane departure warning on the truck would not have prevented that crash. So that's the kind of information at the detail. Also in the crash data, you can't tell if, you can tell if a rollover is the first event, but you can't tell if it's tripped or untripped. So you might be able to determine if it's an untripped rollover. And that's really important for the use of rollover technologies, the RVCS and ESCs. Okay. The vehicle registration data can also be linked to the crash data, and we do that standardly for our crash worthiness ratings projects. And it gives the snapshots in time, so they don't cover like the whole years of registration, they're just whatever's registered at that time of the year. From that, we have developed a system of using the VINs in the registration data to work out the make and model and year of manufacture and market group for passenger vehicles and motorcycles. We were not able to do that for trucks, but it's not for the want of trying. We have tried to get that information and have not been successfully able to get it from the correct bodies. It hasn't worked anyway so far. The licensing data can also be used, and that's quite interesting what you can get out of the licensing information. We have received that information for specific projects of specific cohorts, but the kind of things that we've gotten out of it is looking at the types of conditions and bans and periods of licensing and unlicensing for a driver, court events, demerit points, and we can link that to crash information and see if one group of people have more crashes or not less crashes, or one have more infringements and less infringements, whether licensed people have more, whether unlicensed people have more infringements if they're caught by ANPR or if they're just found by other means, that kind of thing. Also, the sort of information you can get is the vehicle age distributions and market group distributions by being able to link that information from registration data and VINs. Right. Peter is going to talk about RVCS, so I won't cover that here now, but we use that standardly to get information for our VIN decoding. And in addition, information we get from Polk, which has been purchased by his market. I don't think there's meant to be a space there. And information we purchase from Red Book. We can get whether things are standard or optional. So we can see all the cars that have ESC or ABS or different forward collision warning systems, that sort of thing. It's limited with its information for trucks, but I was looking on Red Book and there is an area that you can purchase that gives you information on light trucks and heavy trucks, but I haven't seen the quality of that information. The Red Book is interesting also in that it gives you the cost of the current market value for used vehicles, which may be interesting if you're trying to do an analysis of seeing whether there's a cost benefit in putting a technology into your fleet or replacing your fleet with an entirely different vehicle. You can have a look at the cost of crashes or that may be avoided, the savings, and compare that with the cost that may be available for you on Redbook to see if replacing. You probably have better ways of doing that. It's just one other use that you might be considered. Okay. That's the FCAI also have, that's just an example of the web page for them, but they have information on new sales of vehicles. And so do ABS, and there's various other research marketing groups that have that kind of information as well, such as that one. And new vehicle sales can be useful in measuring penetration of different things through the fleet over time. So if you are looking at technology, say you bought, say you're looking at the percentage, it's easier for me to do an example with passenger vehicles because I have done that work. But if you look at, first of all, the Red Book and see which cars have, which makes and models have, forward collision warning systems. Then you have a look at what percentage of market share in new vehicle sales those vehicles have. Then you can have a look at the penetration rate over time, considering how many of those were bought, and you can model that way to have a look at how long it would take for a technology to take up without mandates, and then you can compare it with how long it would take with mandates. Okay, what's something else? You could just also track the market group changes over time by using the new sales information for various years. This is some other exposure data that Stuart has listed out. I really don't know a lot about any of those, but if there's any there of interest, feel free to note them. Okay. Melissa talked about, showed you some actual information about the motor vehicle census and how that information can be used. But ABS also can give you some useful information on exposure and economic indicators, such as these listed here, such as, the alcohol sales may be important, labour force stats may be important for you. In particular, the crash cost data, the exposure vehicle kilometres, and the growth rates that are provided by BITRA have been quite useful for me. And just recently I heard a presentation on forecasting crashes. I think it was in the Netherlands, and they'd included weather in their forecasting models, and trends that they thought they had seen in road fatalities going up were accounted for by just changes in weather, which is really hard to engineer around. But the effect of weather in forecasting can be quite important. There's lots of other government agency information available. Here's some of the state websites. Are they getting the slides? Are they getting a set of the slides? Can people get them?
If you're happy to provide them.
Yeah, if anybody wants the slides, I can actually forward them to you.
No, we'll provide them.
Oh, they can provide them, yeah. Okay, big data is a really interesting one. I really think that it's worth everybody having a look at that one. There are around 72 transport-related data sets there, and they can be things like B-double transport routes. They can be just road networks, and they're useful for mapping spatially the crash data on and creating heat maps. There's also information on where bridges are, where red lights, traffic lights are, where it's just astounding the information Big Roads provides. And there is a lot of particularly heavy vehicle information there. So as you can see, some of those websites do not contain data, and that's probably because those states do not have it listed. New Zealand has, I haven't got that one up there, but New Zealand does have their crash data online as well. Here's an example of the big government site. It comes up with that list. You can just click on the transport and go into there, and then you can choose more categories. And also you'll find, if you Google things, you'll find some places you hadn't even thought of that might have crash data. And here's an example, just isn't one that I wouldn't have gone looking for there. That's it. If you've got any questions for Carlyn or myself.
Thanks, Lauren. I have a question. The insurance industry has a big interest in crashes,
Yes.
and yet I didn't see any insurance industry data.
They're very closed with it. Usually you have to have some sort of partnership. It seems to happen more in America than here. They have big insurance companies that do produce a lot of research that is available for American information. Not so much here. No. We don't. I don't know what they do with the other injury, like in other parts of MUARC. Do you know if you use insurance data in?
It's really problematic. We have used it with the emergency services, but we weren't actually the ones to get that information. So, thanks. We have used insurance data with some of the emergency services, but we weren't the ones to actually receive the data. So there's lots of issues around access there.
Well, I thought that NTI would be very, very accommodating with their data. Once they produce crash statistics and insurance statistics, and they reveal it at the Australian Trucking Association and NAPRO conferences every year. So I don't see there to be any problem in getting that sort of data from them.
Probably isn't. We've got to actually have a reason to pay them for it. Usually we have to pay for every data set we have. So we've got to have a contract. We're a government organisation. We're only funded through contracts. So we've got to have someone who says, we want to do this project. And then we sort of, Stuart would probably be able to answer that question. I haven't had to do that.
Get it for nothing.
Yeah, they said they emailed it here.
Okay. Maybe Stuart knows about that one. I haven't.
It's not like a while ago, I think. Yeah.
I haven't had the need. Okay, I'll have a look into that.
Laurie, there is fatal crash information every quarter, I think.
Yeah, from Vitra.
Vitra releases that. Is there a routine listing of crashes that have occurred that aren't necessarily fatal?
Yeah, the crash.
Police stuff. Is that
Sorry, I wasn't clear on that. I apologise. The police reported crash data includes fatal crashes crashes where people are seriously injured, where they go to hospital. Linking that with TAC information is useful because sometimes they're sent straight home. So you can then say how serious it is if they actually get admitted. But that information does flow back to the police reported crash data, and they do try to correct it for admissions.
Can you get the police data?
And there is also the property damage only crashes. Now that is different from state to state. Victoria doesn't report any crashes that are property damage only. There may be vehicles that have only had property damage and no injuries within a crash, but somebody has to be injured for it to be in the Victorian data. And then the definition of what they include as the minimum property damage for it to be included in the data set is different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction as well.
Yes. So you can get that sort of data from the jurisdictional agencies by boring down through those websites
No.
you pay for them?
No, we do something called the crash worthiness ratings every year, and we buy the data sets for that. Some of it is freely available, like Victorian, and some of it isn't. I don't think Western Australia give out anything without you signing 100 contracts and of secrecy and whatever. So they're all different.
Yes. Thank you. Well,